Translator, Dark Angel. Editor. An oppressive stillness spread through the air, as if storm clouds had gathered without thunder. The 5 dragons were all scions of eminent lineages, their clans rooted deep and ancient. Were it a head-on clash against the Spirit Treasure's pavilion, they would not dare to overstep. Yet if it was merely teaching a lesson to someone at the pavilion's grand entrance, they believed the pavilion would not pursue the matter overmuch. They were certain the pavilion would grant them at least this measure of indulgence. The gazes of the 5 dragons locked upon Ling Han, cold as winter frost. This youth dared address them with such arrogance. How could it not stir fury in their hearts? Ling Han clasped his hands behind his back, a faint smile playing at his lips. You wish to make a move? Then you had best weigh the consequences. Later, even if you kneel before me and beg for mercy, whether I grant it will depend on my mood. Ha ha! The 5 dragons sneered in unison. Did this brat truly not know how the character for death was written? The surrounding onlookers burst into laughter as well. They had seen many reckless madmen, yet never had they witnessed someone so brazenly arrogant, without the slightest visible foundation to support such confidence. How utterly reckless! Fei Zhang stepped forward. As one of the exalted 5 dragons, he naturally would not stoop to joining forces against a single opponent. Yet as one who stood among the 5 dragons, as an extraordinary exception, his strength was beyond doubt. He thrust out a hand. Intricate patterns interwove across his palm, then burst forth into a dazzling golden radiance. In that instant, his arm seemed no longer flesh and blood, but the golden claw of a divine dragon descending from the heavens. Ling Han appeared stunned, standing motionless without the slightest reaction. The crowd shook their heads. When they had seen him standing so loftily, they had thought perhaps he possessed some hidden might. Yet now, it seemed he could not even endure a single strike. The dragon claw closed in, its approach accompanied by a crushing pressure that surged outward like a tidal wave. For a lower-level flower blossom tier cultivator, mere contact with that pressure would be enough to split skin and tear flesh. Ling Han did not raise a hand. No, he raised his foot. In a single decisive motion, he sent a direct kick toward Fei Zhang's face. The timing of that kick was exquisite, as though calculated to the smallest breath. It happened to evade Fei Zhang's strike by a hair's breadth. Had Fei Zhang regarded Ling Han with greater caution, he would never have launched such a close-quarters assault, nor would he have been so rash with his opening move. But fate was unkind. His carelessness led him to believe felling Ling Han would be effortless. Thus, the kick landed squarely upon his face. How could an arm exceed a leg in reach? Before Fei Zhang's claw could graze Ling Han, Ling Han's extended foot struck true. Fei Zhang let out a muffled grunt and snapped his head aside, narrowly avoiding the full brunt of the blow. After all, he was one of the 5 dragons, among the most outstanding of the younger generation. He was no weakling. He staggered back several steps, a burning pain spreading across his face. Instinctively, he lifted a hand to touch it, only to find streaks of blood upon his fingers. Though he had evaded the full strike, the gale generated by the kick was as sharp as a blade. He had not cultivated the body of iron sheet. How could he emerge unscathed when the residual force of a flower blossom tier attack brushed against him? Hiss. A collective intake of breath sounded. Fei Zhang, one of the 5 dragons, had suffered a loss in a single exchange. Though it was merely a scrape and did not diminish his combat strength, among their peers, how many could wound Fei Zhang at all? Even if Fei Zhang had been careless, Ling Han's skill must be formidable to accomplish such a feat. I truly underestimated you. Fei Zhang wiped away the blood from his face, his eyes tinged with red. Genuine anger now stirred within him. Ling Han replied coolly, On the contrary, I did not overestimate you. You truly possess only this much ability. Damn, how unbearably arrogant. Not only was Fei Zhang enraged, the remaining 4 dragons' expressions darkened as well. The 5 dragons stood as one. Fei Zhang's humiliation was their humiliation. Their pride was not something to be trifled with. Again! Fei Zhang's voice turned icy. This time he had learned his lesson. He would not engage in close combat. A cultivator's greatest weapon was the qi they had tempered over years. How could he unleash its full might at arm's length? Grandmaster Ling! At that very moment, a shout rang from the top of the staircase. Teng! 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 A short, rotund figure barreled down the steps. The man was so corpulent that his legs were scarcely visible. To the eye, it seemed a giant meatball was rolling down the stairs. Ordinarily, such a sight would provoke uproarious laughter. Yet not a single person dared laugh, for this was a high-ranking figure of the Spirit Treasures Pavilion, his cultivation lofty, his status exalted. The seventh Pavilion Master, Ying Shui Yang. Within the Spirit Treasures Pavilion of the Middle State, there were 9 Pavilion Masters in total. Each was a towering existence, qualified to stand shoulder to shoulder with sect masters and grand elders of the ancient great clans. Moreover, all 9 Pavilion Masters were heaven-tier elites. Did the Spirit Treasures Pavilion possess a shattering void-tier powerhouse? Rumors claimed so, yet none had ever seen such a figure. For a heaven-tier great cultivator to personally descend and welcome a Grandmaster Ling, what manner of existence must this Grandmaster Ling be? An Earth-grade high-level alchemist? No, no, such a figure might not warrant this courtesy. It must be a heaven-grade alchemist. But the world only had 2 heaven-grade alchemists, and neither bore the surname Ling. Wait, there was indeed a heaven-grade alchemist surnamed Ling. He hailed from the northern region and was rumored to have inherited the legacy of the 12 courts. It was said he had even uncovered the location of an immortal's treasure repository. Had that heaven-grade alchemist arrived here? Where? Eyes darted in every direction, eager for a glimpse of this legendary person. Naturally, none suspected Ling Han. He was far too young. How could such a youth be any kind of grandmaster? The rolling meatball descended all the way, and those in its path scrambled aside, fearful of being flattened. Some failed to evade in time and were sent flying like rag dolls. Yet Ying Shui Yang showed not the slightest intention of slowing. Such was the privilege of a heaven-tier cultivator. He acted as he pleased. The 5 dragons were alarmed and hastily stepped aside. They possessed no qualification to challenge a heaven-tier expert. Even the foremost elders of their clans would have to bow meekly before Ying Shui Yang. If they were sent flying, they would simply have to swallow their grievance as misfortune. Yet Ling Han did not move an inch. Hiss, who did this brat think he was? If he were trampled to death by a heaven-tier elite, it would be a foolish death indeed. Who told him to be so blind? The meatball's speed was astonishing. In a blink, he was before Ling Han. Everyone shook their heads. Clearly, Ling Han would be sent flying just like the others. But at that very instant, the meatball, no, Ying Shui Yang, abruptly halted as if slamming on invisible brakes, stopping directly before Ling Han. A smile bloomed upon his round face. He was so fat his neck had vanished entirely, making it seem as though a small ball rested atop a larger one, an absurdly comical sight. Yet none dared laugh. To mock a heaven-tier cultivator to his face was to court death. Ling Han, however, burst into hearty laughter. With each peal, the spectators' cheeks twitched involuntarily, a chill creeping into their hearts. They prayed. Ying Shui Yang would not erupt in fury. Should a heaven-tier cultivator rage, blood would surely flow. To everyone's astonishment, Ying Shui Yang also laughed, and he appeared thoroughly delighted. Grandmaster Ling, you honor us with your presence. Forgive me for not welcoming you personally. Please pardon the discourtesy. Ying Shui Yang cupped his fists and bowed. Damn! A wave of dizziness swept over the crowd. A heaven-tier great cultivator had actually bowed before a mere flower-blossom-tier youth. Had their eyes deceived them? And, Grandmaster Ling, this youth was Ling Han? The expressions of the 5 dragons turned ashen, uglier than could be described. Translator, Dark Angel. Editor, Kurisu. This stripling before them was in truth Grandmaster Ling? What manner of jest was this? Yet what heaven-tier sovereign would debase himself to stage such a farce merely to toy with a handful of juniors? If they truly believed so, then they had overestimated their own worth beyond measure. All at once they recalled Ling Han's earlier words. Even if Fei Zhong and the 4 dragons were to kneel and kowtow before him in repentance, he might not so much as spare them a glance. At that time, they had taken it for arrogant bluster. Now, however, each and every one of them knew it to be unvarnished truth. A heaven-grade alchemist. What kind of transcendent existence was that? Even heaven-grade cultivators would personally step forth to receive such a figure. From this alone, one could discern how exalted his standing and how terrifyingly lofty his status was. A few juniors of the flower blossom tier were not even fit to carry his shoes. Ling Han revealed a faint smile and said, "You are too courteous. How should I address you?" Behold his influence. Ying Shuiyang had personally emerged to welcome him, yet Ling Han did not even know his name. What boundless arrogance! Ha ha ha, Ying Shuiyang. I am the 7th Pavilion Master of the Spirit Treasures Pavilion. If Grandmaster Ling does not disdain it, you may simply call me Little Yang, Ying Shuiyang said with a broad grin. The crowd instantly shuddered in revulsion. Gazing upon this man's figure, none could imagine who would dare call him Little Yang. In this world, how many were truly qualified to address him thus? Aside from a few invincible beings of the Shattering Void tier, perhaps only certain high-ranking Heaven tier cultivators possessed such standing. 7th Pavilion Master. Ling Han himself felt a flicker of disgust. No matter how he tried, he could not force himself to utter the words Little Yang. Grandmaster Ling wishes to participate in today's auction? Ying Shuiyang inquired. That is so. Ling Han inclined his head. Please, please. Ying Shuiyang hurriedly extended an invitation within. Ling Han strode forward. Instantly, the gathered crowd, Fei Zhang and that dissolute young master in particular, secretly exhaled in relief. Yet Ling Han suddenly halted, then turned and addressed Ying Shuiyang. 7th Pavilion Master, if I were to call a few people to account, would that make me seem overly tyrannical? Ying Shuiyang's expression darkened at once. Oh, has someone offended Grandmaster Ling? Ho ho, one would have me call him grandfather, another demands I become his follower, and several more even wish to beat me. Ling Han replied with a smile. Upon hearing these words, Fei Zhang and that profligate young master were nearly driven to tears. How could they have known Ling Han was a heaven-grade alchemist? Had they known, they would not have dared utter such nonsense even if beaten to death. Who? Ying Shuiyang's gaze swept across the assembly. In that instant, an overwhelming pressure rolled over the multitude like a collapsing firmament. No longer was he that affable, rotund fellow. He was a heaven-tier sovereign whose single step could shake the world. The onlookers felt their very souls quiver in dread, unable to muster even the faintest shred of strength to resist. Ling Han inwardly nodded. This fatty's cultivation had likely reached the 4th or 5th layer of the heaven tier, though he could not discern precisely which. After all, he himself possessed only a sliver of heaven-tier divine sense at present. Fei Zhang and the profligate young master staggered forward on trembling legs. Both fell to their knees and said, "We beg Grandmaster Ling's forgiveness for our offense." Ling Han behaved as though he had seen nothing, continuing his idle conversation with Ying Shuiyang as they spoke of trifling matters. He was plainly ignoring Fei Zhang, the 4 dragons, and that wastrel young master entirely. He had spoken true. Though they now knelt, whether he would accept their apology depended solely upon his mood. The 5 dragons exchanged glances. Gritting their teeth, they hardened their hearts and began to slap themselves. Seeing this, the profligate young master hastily kowtowed again and again, terrified that Ying Shuiyang might annihilate them all in a fit of wrath. Grandmaster Ling, the auction is about to commence. Why not enter and be seated first? Ying Shuiyang suggested. He, too, was unwilling for so many people to clog the main entrance of the Spirit Treasures Pavilion. Such a spectacle would hardly bode well. Ling Han merely cast a faint smile toward Fei Zhang, the dragons, and that profligate youth, then ascended the steps and entered the great hall. Fei Zhang, the dragons, and that young master were drenched in cold sweat. Though Ling Han had not rebuked them, how could matters be so easily resolved after offending a heaven-grade alchemist? With Ying Shuiyang leading the way, Ling Han entered a private chamber. This was the most opulent private room within the Spirit Treasures Pavilion. At this moment, only Ling Han was accorded such honor. Ordinarily, this supreme chamber would be opened only during the grand auction held once every dozen years, reserved for shattering void tier elites and figures of comparable status. Such as a heaven-grade alchemist, Ling Han had long since grown indifferent to hollow fame. He remained utterly composed in the face of such preferential treatment, and took his seat within the chamber. The auction would soon begin. After conversing with Ling Han for a short while, Ying Shuiyang took his leave. He had also generously granted Ling Han an overdraft tab. 100,000 triple star origin crystals. In truth, the identity of a heaven-grade alchemist was worth far more than this. So why had he extended so modest a sum? The reason was simple. Shattering void tier cultivators might not attach great importance to the inheritance of the 12 courts, but the depository of an immortal, that concerned far too much. If Ling Han became the target of shattering void tier elites, his situation would be fraught with peril. Thus, the Spirit Treasures Pavilion would not rashly invest too heavily in such an unstable variable. To grant him a credit of 100,000 triple star origin crystals was in fact already exceedingly generous. As Ling Han sat, transaction followed transaction upon the stage. Some items found buyers. Others failed to attract bids. It was worthy indeed of a monthly grand auction. The number of items was vast and their variety immense, yet not a single one stirred Ling Han's interest. After all, this auction occurred only once a month. There could not possibly be too many rare treasures each time. Perhaps in another month, during the annual grand auction, truly astonishing treasures would appear. Ha! Suddenly, peals of loud laughter erupted within the venue. Ling Han, who had been on the verge of drowsing, lifted his gaze at the commotion. He saw that the auctioneer was holding a brick. A brick? A trace of amusement rose within Ling Han, but upon reflection, the Spirit Treasures Pavilion would hardly resort to hawking an ordinary brick to deceive its patrons. Thus, he looked more closely. It was not truly a brick. It merely resembled one. Upon careful inspection, its edges were uneven. It seemed once to have formed part of a colossal stone, now broken away. One face was flat, yet on the other there appeared half a character, perhaps better described as vestiges of script, though what it signified could not be discerned clearly. This brick has undergone close scrutiny by several master appraisers of our pavilion. However, they were unable to ascertain its composition or purpose. The only certainty is that it once belonged to a stone plaque and is at least 100,000 years old. Furthermore, this stone brick is exceedingly hard and was excavated from a particular ancient historical site. The auctioneer introduced the brick, evidently unable to extol any further merits, and thus forced to boast as best he could. Ling Han activated the Eye of Truth. Yet even he could not perceive anything extraordinary about it. Only a few traces of script remained, but they stirred something faintly within his heart. Interesting. The starting price is 10 origin crystals, the auctioneer announced, clearly harboring little hope for this lot. 20. 50. 100. Though none could yet discern its use, many were still willing to acquire it as a collectible, given its age of at least 100,000 years. 1,000, Ling Han declared. Without specifying the grade, it was understood to be single-star origin crystals. To Ling Han, single-star origin crystals were scarcely worth mention. 2,000. Another voice raised the bid. The speaker sounded somewhat familiar.